Stuff. Well, I put down revisiting valuing the information asset because actually I'm going to talk about a report I produced with IAC, Information Assurance Advisory Council, back towards the beginning of 2019. I think it was. It came out. For those of you who don't know me, I work as an independent advisor on cybersecurity and risk and military information operations and so on. I teach as a visiting fellow with King's College London, a number of courses. I have an interest in the Southwest because I'm an associate with Barr and Robin King, many of you will know. I also live more or less in the region. I'm at the north end of Gloucestershire, and electorally that puts me in the Southwest, but I'm disenfranchised for television where it's Midlands today. So I'm also actually doing some work in partnership with Exeter University, and I've been involved with the Southwest Cluster for a little while with a number of projects, most recently the visit of American academics to the UK, and we had a great event in Exeter, kindly hosted by Akeem at Exeter, and the cluster as well, so thank you for that. When I left the Information Assurance Advisory Council in 2019, I had actually worked for 4 years, and Sir Edmund Burton on the call was the chairman of IAC, and I was the chief exec, and Andrew just recognized your involvement with it as well. We started this project as a community group, if you like, bringing people together to say, look, there's an issue here about how we value our information assets as a community. As people who support businesses, as a national enterprise, how much we are worth in terms of our data and so on. And we wanted to have a look at that. And we had the support of the IACSN sponsors. On the right-hand side, you can see the cover of the report, and the Royal Academy of Engineering, and Professor Chris Higson at the London Business School as Professor of Accountancy. So during this process, we brought together the SECA with accounting. We brought people who were tax experts in. We brought people who were engineers, and of course cybersecurity professionals, and a bunch of others to say, well, you know, what way should we think about our information and data, and how should we put a value on it, if at all we can. This is a quote from the most recent, published since actually, the most recent UK digital strategy. I've put the link on this. So have a quick read of that. Now that's talking about digital, and that includes a whole range of things, of course, including infrastructure and control systems potentially, as well as the data which flows across networks and the way people use it, and the content of digital services, for instance, through the BBC or whatever it might be. Now that, I think, describes something which is, that talks about us being reliant on digital world for our success, for our jobs, for our wage levels, for prosperity. I'm just wondering how many of you working in cybersecurity have that in mind when you're trying to think about what your data is worth to you, or the function that it plays in the UK as a whole. So in a sense, that's why we wanted to look at this issue. There seemed to be a disconnect between the way that we think about this nationally and what people think about data and information in terms of what it's going to do for the country and what it's going to do for economies and us, and the way that people in the industry, the security professions, think of it. And so one of the tensions, if you like, is that do security people undervalue their information asset by focusing, for example, on the cost of its loss, which in economics is called deprival value. What's the value of you without your data? What would be the impact on your organization if you didn't have that data, and so on. And sometimes we look at that, well, how much would it be to put it right? How much would it cost for us to recover? How much would it cost to do the forensics on it? How much would it cost to, for instance, talk to our customers and tell them that we've lost their data, or someone else has it as well, is more likely the case, and so on, or how much it costs for a ransomware attack. And so in some ways while those are important things, it's sort of quite narrow compared to this idea of the value of digital and the value of data to the country as a whole and the economy as a whole. So how can we bridge this gap? It's interesting noting that there was really no consensus on how information and data should be valued. There's different approaches are put forward, and there's another reason to try and to look at it. There was also a view that we heard this from time to time amongst our membership, if you like, in the community, that companies aren't going to take it seriously unless they put their information assets on the balance sheet. In other words, if they treated it like money, if they treated it like a financial asset, then they would take it more seriously, as opposed to it being some sort of hygiene factor or some technical artifact of the company. The thing was, we weren't even sure whether this was even possible. Could you put an information asset on the balance sheet in the way that you could put perhaps your stock on the balance sheet? So we wanted to look at that as well. So what did we do? Well, if we first of all have to think about how we used to value companies in the past, before data-driven business and so on, and suppose in the industrial era. And the way that you valued a company was more or less by the sum of its tangible assets. A physical asset being something that you can touch essentially, or bang your head off if it's the wall of your office. So we're talking about something physical. And so let's say it's your building on the left-hand side. There's your industrial facility. There's some of your stock that's sitting around, perhaps some of the fuel that you've got. And when you added all of that up, and maybe some accounting for your order book, and maybe a little bit for brand, but not too much, essentially it was a one-to-one relationship, more or less, between the value of your business and what you paid for it, because it was based on your assets, your physical assets that you held. Okay. All of that changes with digital and with information and data, because the value of, let's say, we mentioned Apple before, the value of its physical assets is tiny by comparison to the value of the business. And we can look at maybe share price as an indicator of the value of the business in that instance, because of all of the things that it does that it is responsible for, that it holds, that it produces in terms of intellectual property, its brand itself, and so on. All of that is what values the business today. And in many respects, almost always in these businesses, the intangible assets are much more valuable than physical assets, and they're the thing that differentiates you from your competitors. For an airline, its intangible assets are, for instance, the routes it has. Okay, these are what makes it a differentiator. It's customer service. These are the things that makes it a differentiator, and so it's, in some respects, it's much more difficult to value the company for purchase, except by taking in a whole lot of other factors today. So something that we learned during this as a community, other people knew this, but they had to tell us and had to engage on it, was that information assets are intangible assets. You can't really hold them. Like, you can hold the computer, you can hold the server, and for many years people just sort of thought that the value of the information is the cost of the laptop. And we've been around that boy a few times. Okay. So information assets are unique. And they're unique because value is generated when they're put to use. And the way you use them is different from the way I use them. In fact, we could both have the same data and we could have two different business models and make very different different income from them. So that's one of the features of this intangible asset. It is unique to you. And because it's unique to you on the way that you use it, there can't be a market for them. Because if the same information is more valuable to you and less valuable to someone else, and so on, it's used in different ways, then you can't really set up a market that's going to run well. Okay, so these are important concepts for what we're going to say. They're unique, and they can't be put. There's no market for them. Therefore, they can't be placed on the balance sheet, because if, for instance, you said, well, my information assets are worth this much, and I'm going to put it on the balance sheet because you wanted to show a profit, but next year, and you want to value your business for sale, maybe. You wanted to attract investors, and you said, well, my information assets are worth this much to me. But then when it comes to taxation, you say, well, actually, my information assets are not as much worth as much as you think for me, and so on. You might have come across this debate with the fraud case that's currently ongoing at the moment with Donald Trump, for instance, which is all about whether he, in fact, I think he's found to be guilty of this, and now they're looking at damages. That's what's happening at the moment. But essentially, did he inflate the value of his assets for so that he get bigger loans, but also reduce them so his tax would be reduced? That's part of the discussion, allegedly, and all the rest of it, in case he watches this a bit later on. But essentially, if you're going to change the value of these and yourself, then you can't really, there's no market for it, and you can't put it on the balance sheet. In fact, intangible assets are not put on the balance sheet because the same problem applies about what the market for them is and so on. Now, there are arguably some exceptions. One of them is, well, isn't there a market for raw data, lists of people's contact details? We know that there's a market and people buy and sell that. Isn't that a market for data? In that instance, though, you're thinking about data more like a commodity. It's where there is a market for saying lists of data for people you can market to and whatever, people who have ticked that it's okay to share their data or whatever it might be. That's not the same as the way a business uses its data to make money. That's a different concept. So if data is more like a commodity, then there can be a market. But because your asset is unique to you in the way that you use it, there can't be a market for that. Okay, so now there's another exception as well, that if you acquire a company and you purchase its data at the same time, you might agree a price for that data. And so that's the only time that it could be put on a balance sheet is on acquisition. And when you usually an asset which is acquired at purchase and so on, then has to be so-called amortized throughout. In other words, its value decreases over time. And you write some of that off. You reduce its value as you go through time. Okay, which is according to globally accepted accountancy practice. Okay, which is the sometimes referred to as the GAAP. Okay, so that's sort of gets you the accountancy angle of that. We know that these things are very valuable. In fact, they're the most valuable things that companies have, but you can't put it on the balance sheet for the reasons that I've outlined. I'm happy to go through over any of that as well. So what we get alongside the balance sheet is something called narrative reporting. And this is the reports that a regulatory body or otherwise or authority would require a business to supply alongside their balance sheet. The problem with financial reporting and just its figures is it's backward looking. And when you publish your accounts, one of the things that investors are interested in is what you're going to do in the future. And so the UK financial sector have been sort of thinking about this for a long time and saying, well, how do we produce our reporting such that not only do we show that we're running our business well and things are as they expect to be and that they're legal, but actually we can give some idea of what's going to happen and what's the future performance look like. And that's where narrative reporting comes in. So you have your narrative report, which is the text that you write alongside it. It accompanies the financial report, and in that you'll look to inform your various investors and your stakeholders about other types of value creation that aren't on your balance sheet, and that would be, for instance, your ESG, environmental, social, governance activities, for instance, because you want to be seen as a good company who takes your responsibilities towards environment and so on seriously. And future direction and performance, that's where the narrative element has come in. I know that in financial service in the UK, if it hasn't come in already, and I should have checked before I talked, but their plan is to make it compulsory that you will report on cybersecurity in a narrative way. Okay. That, of course, brings us into another question, which is, how do we report on cybersecurity in a narrative sense to show value and investment and how it works, how we put data to use to create value and what we do with it? As someone who manages an asset, you're not just going to hopefully be sticking it underneath your mattress and hoping that it's still there when you look again. But you're going to actually try and grow it. You're going to use it. You're going to exploit it to its full potential because you want people to invest in you. But how do you report that? Are you going to just say, well, it would cost us this much if we lost it? Which is where we are often. Okay, so let's have a little bit of a look at that. Can current approaches to security planning take account of future-oriented value creation principles embodied in narrative reporting? In a sense, that was one of the key questions that we also looked at in this. So if we think about the digital processes or the process of change, we've got several types of jargon that we could use, all of which bring different levels of value and types of value to the way companies operate. So digitization, simple one of sort of going paperless is one easy way to think about that. Digitalization is really about creating new business models, turning to a digital business. So you're not just getting rid of paper, you're actually changing the way that you do business. Maybe you do much more online, maybe you sell more through your web front end, and so on. Datafication, it's actually this collection of tools and processes where you're saying, well, actually, insight is what drives us now. It's the data itself which is driving our business. Or what I want to talk about a little bit more, this notion of servitization, which describes ways in which digital and data processes are added to the services, or even bring in new products. So as examples of that, we took some of the Royal Academy Engineering case studies that existed around from their report Connecting Data, which is still online. And they'd done some work with their members, and we said, well, okay, what value in this servitization process does cybersecurity offer into what they do? Okay. And so on the left-hand side, Rolls-Royce, well, we know that they do live monitoring of engines whilst in flight. And they can show in their finances the way that that service model, they weren't just selling engines anymore, they were selling services on the back of this for better engines, safer engines, more reliable engines, and all the incentives that go with that to provide a safe engine to aircraft buyers and so on and so forth. Okay. Caterpillar, big bits of kit involved in mining operations. So they put sensors on the kit, and then they could know how full it was, how often it moved, what the efficiency of mining operations were. Wood Group, they were actually working with the oil and gas industry, and they wanted to know about share as a sector well failure data. But operators were unwilling to share because actually some of the most sensitive information that companies have is about their oil and drilling and gas activities. And so trying to get to share operations required anonymous sharing on a platform. Okay, again, another type of service. So one of the things we've looked at, well, what's the value chain here in terms of what is derived from information and data activities, and is that the way of thinking about the value of what we're protecting? In other words, not just the cost of its loss, it's what it does for us. It means that we can actually have trusted people. People are actually working with us on trusted information and data in very sensitive areas, or efficiency of mining operations becomes something that is really valued by our customers and not simply the big bit of kit with the wheels on. We looked at the way HR, human resources, try and talk about their value to the organization. They've been through the same process. How can you put a figure on what HR does for a business? And they come up with an HR scorecard and so on. So we tried to inform this, looking at other functions in the business with similar problems. And we eventually landed on trying to show a value chain here, which at the bottom is around the information asset, which then is about, well, what processes does that asset perform? What does it do for our customers? And in the end, how does it help us with our finance? So in terms of Rolls-Royce, the asset was about live data collection and monitoring of engines. What did it do for us? Well, it designed improvement in engines, it allowed us maintenance, disruption avoidance, incentivized engineers to be the best that they could be, and their customers, as confidence, loyal, and so on and so forth. So we're really trying to develop that narrative. around why it was of value. Caterpillar, well, quarry operations optimization analytics was really what they were producing based on sensors on their kit. And the internal business process, spare part production optimization, asset monitoring, enhanced security of spares, because if you were carrying too much, spares could go missing. If you carried enough, then there wasn't as much to steal. And there was another, so there were a few things that actually came out of that in terms of value. Customer business insight, efficiency, and so on, long-term relations, new business models. The Wood Group, trusted supplier. At the bottom, data analytics applied to anonymize commercially sensitive data from industry players, findings shared across industry. That's really what they were doing. The Wood Group got a market perspective on optimization across oil and gas, and the customers, they got efficiencies from insight of shared data, and again, they're a trusted supplier, and so on and so forth. So again, that's what we put into the narrative reporting and so on. The conclusions that we made from this study are these: that we found that there was utility in looking at information assets closely aligned in this sort of way with business strategy, although through a sort of scorecard process. You can read all about it in the report itself. I know that we all try and sort of work on the what the crown jewels are for a business, how valuable the information asset is in business terms. This is something that we know. It's just that there was no consensus on the way that we do that or think about it. And we had this idea, really a pervasive idea, that essentially we focus on its loss above everything else. So the strategy map and value chain, that's what we've just looked at. In a sense, offers potential by means by which information assets may demonstrate business relevance and value. Narrative and integrated reporting continue to be validated and researched in relation to accounting and audit, and that's a key part of today's view on audit of businesses. And there's no doubt there's a desire for better reporting on tangible assets, and that's been taken up across the industry and in government. So it might not appear on the balance sheet, put that one to bed, but narrative reporting can be read alongside it, essentially. So that's all I wanted to say, just to revisit that. This sort of revisit was prompted, by the way, by a LinkedIn dialogue where someone asked the question and said, "Oh, we've already done some of this work. Here you go." And so it's interesting how some of these things can be pulled forward to try and answer current questions.